All right, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the first demo day for the PlayLabs accelerator here at MIT. Here you can see our agenda tonight. I'll be making a few introductory remarks and introduce you to some of the people behind PlayLabs and tell you a little bit about our philosophy, why we started the accelerator and structured it the way that we did. Then at 6:30, we'll move on to the main event, the pitches from the 13 startups that were part of our first batch at PlayLabs. We'll have about a 10-minute break in between after the first 6 or so, and then we'll finish with the next 7. Now, with virtual reality and augmented reality, you really have to see it to believe it. So from 8 to 9, we have our demo and networking time, and so all of the teams have tables set up outside. 3 of them are here on the second floor. Most of the virtual reality and augmented reality companies are down on the first floor, and one's even outside towards Killian Court. So at 8 o'clock, we'll wrap up here, and everybody can head out and actually try out the products and see what exciting things we've been up to here for the summer. All right, so before I get started, let me just give a special thanks to VR at MIT, which is our student group sponsor. They're a group that's dedicated to increasing the visibility of virtual reality at MIT. I'd like to thank HTC, which gave MIT a bunch of Vives, and our companies were able to use those over the summer. And I'd like to thank Toscanini's, who gave us a bunch of ice cream so that our teams were, had plenty of desserts and sugar to keep them up during the summer. So PlayLabs was started by 3 groups, and I'll go through each of them, and you'll get to meet folks. Bayview Labs is my organization, so I'll tell you a little bit about me in a second. We were hosted by the MIT Game Lab, and we'll have Scott Osterweil, one of the faculty members there, talk a little bit about the MIT Game Lab and why they worked with us on PlayLabs. And then Seraph Group, my partner Tuff Yen there, who actually helped us to fund the initial batch, he'll talk a little bit about, from an investor perspective, what PlayLabs is all about. So let's jump in. As I mentioned, Bayview Labs is my organization, and I think I'll just give you a little bit of background on myself so you can kind of learn a little bit about my journey from MIT into the world of startups, into the world of video games, and back here to MIT. In fact, I think this is the same classroom I was in for my very first class at MIT over 20 years ago. So I graduated in the 90s in course 6-3, the electrical engineering and computer science, and in my senior year, we had a competition, a business plan competition, and my classmate and I wrote a business plan for a company called Brainstorm Technologies, and we entered it into the competition. Now, you guys know it as the 100K competition, but back then, it was only the 10K competition. So I guess there was a little bit of inflation involved there. After I graduated, I did my undergraduate thesis at the Media Lab in the Interactive Cinema group, and there was a company that was spun out from that group. It was probably the first, or certainly one of the first, some people say the first successful spin-off from the Media Lab. And so that was a company called Diva, Digital Video Applications, which made a video editing software for QuickTime. They competed with Adobe Premiere back in the day. Now, for our younger attendees here and those watching online, those are floppy disks. That's how we used to ship software. We'd put the software on the floppy disks, we would shrink wrap the package, and then we would ship it out to our customers. So Diva got gobbled up by Avid, which is a pretty well-known company when they went public, and I really got the startup bug while I was there. So we dusted up our business plan from the MIT competition, and my co-founder and I created a company called Brainstorm Technologies. We had software for enterprises to connect all their big systems together. The product was a hit. We had thousands of customers, and yes, we shipped those boxes out to all the Fortune 1000 companies, and they were able to use it. Now, somebody asked Elon Musk recently about what entrepreneurship is like, and he said, well, it consists of incredible highs, terrible lows, and lots of stress. And nobody wants to talk about the last two, right? Because we only hear about the successes. But with Brainstorm, after we had lots of customers, we ran into a lot of the problems that many startups run into, such as needing to pivot based on your product, running out of money, issues with investors, et cetera, et cetera. And so as I reflected on that experience, I actually ended up writing a book called Zen Entrepreneurship as a therapeutic exercise after my first startup. So fast forward a few years, I got tired of doing enterprise software, and I went out to the West Coast, where I started making video games. We didn't have any video game classes at MIT back when I was a student, so I thought this was kind of cool, and it was a lot more fun than making enterprise software. Turns out a lot of people were making video games on the West Coast at the time, and so I ended up starting to invest in a number of startups who were making mobile and social games and gaming technology, and many of them went on to become very successful companies. And so last year, when I was invited by the MIT Game Lab to come back to MIT to speak at a video game class and to start thinking about collaboration, I started to think about the role of video game technology, not just for gaming, but really in all areas of technology. And that brings us to the first reason why we structured PlayLabs as we did. Turns out that most technologies we use today have some roots within gaming. And this is not just from the last few years, this goes back many decades. Some of you might recognize this screenshot. This is an example of the first GUI for a game, and probably the first GUI anywhere. This is from a game called Space War, which was invented here at MIT in 1962. Now, today we have a lot of artificial intelligence, right? Very, very popular topic these days. Turns out the first practical AI implementation was a computer made by Professor Claude Shannon here at MIT to do what? To play chess. So AI has a lot of roots in gaming here at MIT. And today, another technology that's very popular is chatbots, right? And if you look back, chatbots have their origin in the text adventure games, going back to Zork, which was founded by a group of MIT alumni. And in fact, we have Mike Dornbrook, who is one of the management team members from Infocom here today. But it's not just within MIT. If you look at any technology today that's popular, you can trace its roots somewhere back to gaming. So let's look at virtual reality. Virtual reality owes a lot to the first-person shooters that came out in the 90s, in particular Doom. And I'm saying that not just because the co-founder of the company that made Doom was also the CTO at Oculus. Whenever Apple comes out with new hardware, what do they show? They show games to show how cool their new hardware is. If you think about augmented reality, where was the first augmented reality? It was HUDs, or heads-up displays, within games. So you see, gaming technology really is a microcosm for all of what we think of as software and hardware today. In fact, another very popular topic these days is machine learning, right? We have a few machine learning companies in our cohort. The first time I ever thought of a machine learning anything was in the context of gaming, a very important set of games. Maybe some of you will recognize this. Right? That was from the movie War Games with Matthew Broderick, where the computer played tic-tac-toe to learn that there really was no winner in a global thermonuclear war, a topic that's kind of important these days as well. So we decided to focus on playful technologies as a way to keep a handle on all of the new things that are going on. The second reason why we started PlayLabs was based on my own experiences with my very first startup. So in my first company, we had no office space. We were the proverbial two guys in a garage working on our first product. Now, I say proverbial because everybody here, although some of the people watching online may not know, but it's way too cold in New England to start a company in your garage in the middle of winter. So we were two guys in a living room. We had no money. We would literally go and buy computers from Best Buy, which was Lechmere at the time, and return them within 30 days. So we had some computers to test our software on, QA machines. And then we borrowed $5,000 from my co-founders, Mitch's parents, just so we could go out to a trade show in Florida. Luckily, we sold enough of those floppy disks at that trade show that we were able to pay back his parents, and it was uphill from there. We also had no mentors initially. Eventually, we got in touch with the MIT Alumni Network, guys like Brad Feld, who's a very well-known VC now, Dean Redfern, and many others. And so, we wanted to give this new generation of startups a way to jump across all of these problems at the beginning. And part of this reason is that we only hear about the successes. We hear about the companies that go straight up. But the reality is any successful startup has had many curves that it's had to go through before it became successful. And so we thought if we could reduce some of those curves at the very beginning, that would lead to more successful companies. And so that's why we structured PlayLabs as we did. So this January, we sent out the word around MIT and alumni groups that we're starting a playful tech accelerator. We decided to focus in on virtual reality and augmented reality, but we really said it could be any playful technology startup, and you could apply that to any industry: finance, aerospace, healthcare, and of course games. So we had a bunch of people apply, and we ended up with, we thought we'd have 5 to 10 startups, but we ended up with 13 startups because we liked a lot of the pitches that were made to us. And through the summer, we gave them office space on campus. We gave them mentoring. We started right after graduation in June, and the program formally ends today at Demo Day, before classes start. And they were mentored by a great group of startup experts who really took the raw material of these startup ideas and turned them into what hopefully will be very polished pitches today. So let me just acknowledge some of our mentors. We have Ichiro and Raj Sarati, who were our business mentors, and Irfan, if he's here, is the third mentor. There he is, way over there. And then each of the startups also got mentoring from faculty and staff at the MIT Game Lab. So we have Rick and Sarah, who's downstairs, and Andrew and Philip, who may be around here in different places as well. And so they took the curriculum that they used in their video game classes for design, development, and engineering, and mentored each of our startups throughout the summer so that they could build better products. We had a great group of speakers. We had people from, including one of the co-founders of Harmonix, which made Guitar Hero, one of the biggest hit video games of all time. We had Mike, who was with Infocom, going all the way back to the Zork days, as well as Harmonix. We had guys who had started legal tech companies, and so we mentored the teams each week. We gave them a little bit of money, what we call pre-seed, so that they didn't have to buy and return computers. They could own their own equipment. They could make a trip down to Florida for a conference or to New York to see a client. And now each of the companies at the end of the program is raising a seed round of between several hundred thousand up to maybe 2 million at the top end. So that's how we structured the program. So with that, I'd like to welcome up Scott Osterweil, who's creative director of the MIT Game Lab and the Education Arcade, and he can give you a little bit of perspective about the Game Lab and why they're doing what they're doing to work with us.
Thanks, Riz. So thank you all for coming, of course, and it's lovely to see so many faces. And I really want to give a big thanks to Riz, because we first met last summer, right about a year ago, on the West Coast, and he was starting to hatch this idea. And to see the alacrity with which he moved to sort of make this actually happen was really impressive. Frequently when you talk to someone like this, it's going to happen 3 years later. And in Riz's case, it happened eight months later. And so we couldn't be happier. The reason we're so pleased to be engaged with this gets back to our sort of core mission in our work. Something I like to point out to people when I talk, if we look in the archaeological record, the oldest known game-playing pieces are about twice as old as the oldest known writing. Take a moment to think about that. Twice as old. So games have been part of human culture far longer than literacy has. And of course, play is older than humans. We see play in all of our vertebrate ancestors, and some have even argued that invertebrates play as well. I would say, if there's anything modernity has done wrong, it's been the sort of the separation of our play life from our work life. I think if we look over the long sweep of history, we probably moved much more fluidly between work and play throughout our existence until the modern era, where we've managed to sort of structure work in a certain way that largely robs us of our play. And our work in our lab is exploring, of course, things like the game industry and how games work and how modern video games have an impact and what that business is. But we're also going deeper. We're really looking at the ways in which our best selves, our playful selves, can be brought back into our everyday lives in more different ways. And which is what's so exciting to me about what Riz is doing, because in fact, we're not just talking about game technology for the game industry, for the video game industry. We're talking about game technology in ways that will affect health and politics and human services and all data processing and who knows what. I mean, I think we're gonna discover a lot through this process. And so that's maybe enough of me talking, but just to say how grateful we are to be part of this process, because it so aligns with our goals, and we're so grateful that you've sort of made it possible. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Scott. Now I'd like to introduce Tuff Yen, who's founder and CEO of the Seraph Group, without whom this also wouldn't be possible, and not just because he funded the initial batch, but he provided an investor's perspective, which is important in the startup industry. So.
All right, I'll keep it short. I got rejected by MIT. I went to Berkeley, so I did okay. But so I want to give you a little background. I'm a private person. I'm not used to public speaking, but 12 years ago, like many entrepreneurs, I decided to make an impact on the investment world in the category of angel investing. After learning from many of my friends who are losing money, don't have to find a good way to investing, or shortage of deal flow or aren't part of the network. So we launched Seraph Group. We call it a smart money startup. 12 years later, we assemble over 300 successful individuals, men, women, all walks of life, from CEO of Fortune 500 company to young startup founders, inventor Apple QuickTime, president of PlayLabs, all sorts of people. The idea is that a platform established where no matter where you are, you bring something to the table, we can leverage each other and back in company, not only financially, but also provide a network access along the entire cycle of a startup company. And Riz, I had the fortune to meet him. He's one of our distinguished members, came to me and said, hey, I'm thinking about starting the MIT PlayLabs. It took me a split second to commit, said, I'm in, I'll help you with this. If I can contribute anything, I'll bring the entire network, and we'll set up the capital, let's go for it. Why do we do that? For those of you who are investors here, this is one of the best way to invest in a startup. Contrary to what you believe is risky, this is actually the least risky way of investing in a startup company. Happy to tell you more afterwards. But I have some message for the MIT community. We are committed to help launch a movement in this city and nearby region. We'll continue to fund this company in 3 former batches. We want to invite all of you who had passion investing in company to join us. This is a tremendous network of people behind Seraph, great faculty members, fabulous academic institution, and just a good environment. And there aren't that much competition, I must say. So we're ready. So come talk to me afterwards if you're an investor and want to join us to help the MIT grow and support the entrepreneur and create, not only wealth for you and for them, and also jobs, good impact to society. So nice to be here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tuff. So I've told you a little bit about why we structured the accelerator the way we did. So before we get to the actual teams, I want to tell you a little bit about our philosophy and the way that I think about startups, which might be helpful as well. So the PlayLabs theme is that the startup journey is an incredible adventure. When I first graduated, it was, business, the metaphor for business was very serious. Get out there, crush your competition, get the sale at all costs. And there was a very adversarial relationship between VCs and investors. And I think at PlayLabs, we're in the business of fun, quite literally. Some of our startups are making fun products. But we also like to have fun, and we consider the startup journey to be an incredible adventure, kind of like an Indiana Jones film. Now, most of you have probably seen some of the Indiana Jones films. Now, why do I say that building a startup is like going on an adventure with Indiana Jones? Well, just like in a treasure hunt in a film like Raiders of the Lost Ark, it would be nice if there was a map that just laid out exactly where the Ark of the Covenant was, and all you had to do was just go and get it, right? But that's not how it works. Usually our hero or heroine gets one clue, and they follow the clue, and where does it take them? To the next clue. And where does that take them? To the next clue. So really, finding the treasure is about following the clues. And so that's one of the important ways that startups are like a treasure hunt. Because at the beginning, if you look at many successful companies, they didn't know exactly where they would end up. They had to follow their intuition. They had to follow the clues. The second reason is that in an Indiana Jones film, there are always lots of colorful characters, like you'll see them in the around Indiana Jones in the picture that show up. Some of them are there to help him on his journey. Some of them are there to hinder him on his journey. And some say they're there to help, but actually have other agendas as well. Well, it turns out a startup journey is not that different. In fact, if you look at Joseph Campbell's stages of the hero's journey, which apply to myths going back to Beowulf, as well as modern ones like Lord of the Rings, you'll see that the stages can be applied to the startup journey quite well. The call to adventure is when our potential entrepreneur thinks of an idea and thinks about jumping into a startup. Crossing the threshold is when our team of adventurers actually makes the decision and jumps in to actually go on this journey. Equipping for the journey is always difficult. There are lots of colorful characters, as I mentioned, that come up, but in addition to physical equipment, they also need to fund themselves and have enough money for the journey. That's where some of the investors here tonight can definitely help. Then they release the product and they go on the road of trials, right? So now you're competing with other products out there. Sometimes you have to pivot. There are all kinds of things that come up. Bilbo Baggins once said that adventures can make you late for dinner. So can startups, actually. Some startups have a visit to the underworld. Now, unlike, say, in Lord of the Rings, where they physically went into the mines of Moria, here this is where entrepreneurs have to face their innermost fears, right, and their demons. Because emotions such as greed, such as insecurity, am I going to run out of money? How much of this do I get? All of these things come into play. And if the entrepreneurial team is able to successfully navigate, that trip down to see their inner demons, then they can find the ultimate treasure. Now, in the startup world, that might mean taking the company public, might mean selling it for hundreds of millions of dollars. It might just mean making cool games. The definition of the treasure and success is different for each company. But I found that these stages of the journey definitely apply, and that's part of the theme that we've had at PlayLabs. Now, if some of you look closely at that book, I don't know if there are any real heavy-duty Indiana Jones fans, but you'll recognize that's from the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And his father, which is played by Sean Connery, had been building a Grail diary of all the clues that might lead him up to the Holy Grail, and he'd been building that over time. That was his book of clues. Now, people always ask me, well, what book should I read to start and grow and sell a successful startup? And the reality is there's no book that can give you steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Doesn't matter if it's a lean startup, the fat startup, 0 to 1, whatever, where you can just follow the steps and your startup will be successful. If that was true, 9 out of 10 startups would be successful. But the reality is that most startups have to follow the clues to find their unique path. Now, there's a famous line from Tolstoy where he started one of his books, and he said that every happy family is alike, but every unhappy family is unhappy in their own unique way. And with startups, you have to flip it around, but it's similar. Most startups that fail for the same reasons. They run out of money, they don't have enough customers, etc. But every startup that I've known that has ever been successful had to find its own unique way. And it doesn't matter what book you read. So, in fact, our textbook was my upcoming book called Startup Myths and Models. We can teach you how to negotiate a term sheet. We can teach you about Series A versus Series B. We can teach you how to do a sales pipeline. But all of those are skills. The reality is that starting a business is as much an act of creativity as it is an act of commerce. And that's why I say it's a very unique adventure for our team of adventurers. And so I'd like to say, to the investors here and in the audience, hopefully you'll help equip some of our teams of adventurers on their journeys. For those here who are artists, developers, consultants looking to help out, Indiana Jones couldn't find the treasure alone, and neither can our team, so hopefully you'll be able to join up and help some of our teams. And finally, for those of you here tonight and watching online who are prospective entrepreneurs, you're thinking of starting your own company, hopefully these tales of our adventurers will inspire you in the same way that the previous generations of entrepreneurs have inspired these companies. So that's our philosophy at PlayLabs. Now I'd like to introduce you to a little bit about the teams, and then we'll jump over to the main event. So we have teams that include alumni and students from the Electrical Engineering Computer Science Department, alumni of the Game Lab, of the Media Lab, as well as the Sloan School of Management. We also have a few teams that weren't MIT affiliated, but we liked what they were doing so much that we invited them to come to MIT for the summer and be part of the program. We have everything from consumer startups to business to business to business to business to consumer. We have everything from virtual pets to zombies. We have machine learning, virtual reality, augmented reality. So we have a great group of startups. Here's the list of startups. Some of you may have seen the description of them online. This is the order that they're going to be presenting in. We're going to have about a 10-minute intermission in the middle, and then we'll finish up with the rest of the teams after that. So quick notes. If you would like to get introduced to the teams and you don't have a chance to meet them tonight, feel free to email us, info@playlabs.tv. Go to our website to join our mailing list. We've given each of the teams 5 minutes for their presentation, so there won't be any time for questions today because we have to get through a lot of teams, but feel free to ask them questions when you meet them afterwards. And so with that, let's go ahead and start meeting the initial team and our first batch of startups for PlayLabs.